Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, Fire, Ice, and Fjords, Exploring Iceland and Greenland, is brought to you by NatHab Expedition Leader and Pro Photographer Anthony Amsel. A little bit more about our presenter. Anthony is a wildlife biology specialist from Montreal who has built a career in conservation, research, and wildlife management. He's a member of the prestigious Canadian Conservation Photographers Collective and and his work has been featured in Canadian Geographic. As a seasoned expedition leader specializing in Arctic ecology and marine wildlife, Anthony has guided expeditions across diverse northern landscapes from Greenland's icy fjords to Hudson Bay's coastal tundra, combining his scientific expertise with exceptional nature photography skills. Thank you for being here today, Anthony. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I could not be more excited to be here today with you all to really kind of dive into the beauties and the mysteries of Iceland and Greenland. So Brooke did a wonderful job of introducing me. Thank you so much. A little bit more about me. I love northern regions. There's something about the cold. It must be because I'm Canadian. I don't know what it is. But there's something about northern regions, probably the fact that they are so remote, so vast, so untapped. And I think that those three descriptive words very much define both Iceland and Greenland. And it is why I'm so excited to share this amazing itinerary with all of you. As Brooke mentioned, I'm a wildlife biologist, I'm a wildlife photographer, so you'll see that all of these pictures, for the most part, are mine. And again, I take them because these places are so unbelievable. And I very much hope that we get to share these wonderful locations with as many of you as possible, both virtually, but of course in person. So this is Fire, Ice, and Fjords, but of course we need to start our journey in Iceland, the land of wonder, the land of myth, but of course the land of vast, vast landscapes. Everything from never-ending moss-covered mountains to beautiful waterfalls, endless skies, and very dramatic contrast. What I love about this country is so many different things. When we have our regular itinerary, which is pretty much what you see on this map, we really circumvent the whole island of Iceland. We get to kind of tap into every single region. However, as a guide, as a human, there's something in me that craves the part of Iceland that people don't get to see very often. And this is where this itinerary becomes so perfect for that purpose. We spend a few days in Iceland before we go to Greenland, but they are so full and so, I would say, just dreamy because we very much spend most of our time in this little red rectangle. But do not be fooled by the size of the region that we cover in relation to our normal itinerary. It is an area where the vast majority of travelers never get to go to. In fact, it's an area where even a bunch of Icelanders have probably never been to. Having guided now in Iceland for several years, having friends there that, send us pictures in the wintertime when we're across the ocean. A lot of them say how we're very lucky to be able to get into this backcountry area. Because again, it's not a region that most people go to. In fact, most of our days out there, we're lucky if we run into 2 or 3 people. Perhaps we'll see a group here and there from time to time, but it really feels like it's just us in the middle of nowhere. And it is what attracts me as a guide to this itinerary, but as well as our travelers. And I was very lucky last year to lead one of the 2 itineraries that we had. I was also able to go scout it and just come up with a few new additions that we're going to be delivering in 2026. But of course, on the first day, there are certain spots that we can't miss. We have to go to them, and they are part of the typical itinerary that we do. But that does not distract by any means from the beauty and wonders that you will find. There's a reason we go to these places. For example, like Skogafoss, this beautiful waterfall that you have here. There's a reason we go see the puffins at Deerhole. There's a reason why we go to Black Sand Beach. It's because although, yes, there are a lot of people there, it is just such a beautiful and monumental way to start this trip. To be able to meld the unique wildlife that's in Iceland with just the contrasting geological and volcanic features of this island is something that is worth stopping for, even if there are a bunch of other human beings around. But of course, our group is so small and so intimate, it feels like family. It feels like it's just us. And, you know, we have that little NatHab touch where we know when to go to these places to be able to avoid the crowds as much as possible. So our first day out in Iceland altogether, yes, you know, we're hitting some of those hot spots, but again, so worth it to be able to stand in the presence of beautiful puffins, to be able to experience what it is to walk behind a waterfall. A waterfall, by the way, that most people in Iceland, in terms of tourists, don't even know about. So really, we are hitting those beautiful spots and really immersing ourselves right on day one. But that's about as much as there is in terms of any sort of pattern with the regular itinerary, because at the end of day one, we end our day in this lovely little town. My test to you all at home is to try to pronounce the word at the bottom of the screen. I'll give you a little bit of help. It's Kirkjubæjarklaustur, Kirkjubæjarklaustur, or just Klauster, as locals like to say. It is kind of our hub for 2 nights. It's where we spend our evenings, but of course we use it as a home base. And as you can see, there's a lot of different features in this beautiful town that you get to go explore on your own time, because of course our days are quite packed. But what I love about it is you're not confined to the hotel. There's so many features that you can go check out on your own that, again, most people don't get to see because they just take the ring road and they keep going by. We get off it. We go off that beaten track and really allow you on your own time in the evenings, if you want, to go explore those beautiful kind of hidden features, whether it's the sister waterfalls that you see in the top picture or the beautiful basalt columns that you have on the ground in the bottom right picture. But then the following day, this is really where things get very personal. And what I mean by that is we go out in our little group, we go out before the crowds, and we really start making our way into the Central Highlands. And that is the region that was in that little red rectangle. And the Central Highlands are very special. Now, keep in mind, they're not necessarily called the Highlands because you're going thousands of feet in elevation. They're called the Highlands because, well, they're not on the coast, is the way that the Icelanders like to explain that. Of course, we're going several hundred feet high, but that being said, we're in this beautiful eclectic landscape. For example, Fjadraflugur. I apologize for any Icelander who is watching right now. I still am butchering those words years after starting my adventures in Iceland. But Fjadraglufur is such an epic, beautiful serpentine canyon, you know, with walls that are hundreds of feet high. And we go early enough to beat the crowds to really have it almost to ourselves. And it's such a good way to start this experience because, as you can see, moss just covers the landscape. And, you know, in a place like Iceland, although you would think it is devoid of all this life, and of course, as the name implies, Iceland, it's actually quite green with over 600 species of moss in the country, which is unbelievable if you really think about it. But really, we immerse ourselves very quickly on that second day. And then from there, we head to Fagrifoss, which you can see in this beautiful video, a gorgeous, gorgeous waterfall. Now, every time I've been to that waterfall, and I'm hopefully not going to jinx myself, so I'm going to knock on some wood here, we have been alone. We haven't seen a single other soul at that waterfall or on the trail. Sometimes we might cross a car that maybe seems a bit lost, but of course we have our local drivers who know exactly where we're going. And that is the goal, is to really be immersed in that beautiful landscape by ourselves. Now, waterfalls, of course, are a key theme of our journey in Iceland. In fact, the word foss that you see at the end there, foss meaning waterfall. We've set a challenge to some guests in the past to see if they can count all the waterfalls that we see. And let me tell you, usually after 3 or 4 dozen waterfalls, people just lose count. But it doesn't matter because every single foss, every single waterfall is unique in its own way. And of course, we see a lot of them. And then beyond that, we go even further into the highlands. We end up in Elgja, which is the fire canyon. Now, to put things in perspective, it's the canyon you see in the bottom right image. This unbelievable canyon was formed from an eruption hundreds of years ago. And if you can picture it, it's very difficult with the human mind to do so, but that valley would have been completely full of lava, an intense and massive lava flow that affected not only Iceland, but of course the rest of the world. But for that story, you'll have to join us on the trip because it is an incredible story and impacts very much ecosystems around the planet from a few hundred years ago. But more importantly, we walk through it. Now, keep in mind, yes, Iceland is volcanically active, but we wouldn't be going into this canyon if that was the case for this particular location. It's unreal to be in it and to just kind of walk through and imagine all that lava that would have flowed, hundreds of years ago. And we make our way to this kind of secret foss, the secret waterfall at the end of it, Ofurfoss, which means the impassable waterfall. It is a two-tier waterfall that you see right behind Sue and Lon, who were guests from last year. We get to see it both from an aerial perspective like that, as well as walk right up to the waterfall. So really just a beautiful day of being in the Highlands, a beautiful day of just being immersed in this little Icelandic family that we have on our trip, and just really enjoying the landscape for what it is. Every single time I've gone there, I'm just so happy when we bring guests because most people have never seen anything like it. Even folks who have been to Iceland before. In fact, on my trip last year with the group, we had 3 or 4 couples who had already been to Iceland. They had already done the ring road. Even some had done it several times, but they were just bewildered by the beauty of this area that they had never seen before. And again, that most people don't get to see. So a very special place. Speaking of special places, the next one on our list, Laki, is one that, and for those of you who can perhaps see my face on camera right now, I have this big smile. Laki is also this unbelievable area. And I keep using this word unbelievable because honestly, it really is, especially when you're there in person, when you're walking through these areas. Your eyes record what's going on, but it takes your brain a few moments to really absorb this very different landscape that almost feels like you're on a different planet. But the Laki area, Laki is the name of an eruption that happened in 1783 and affected 25% of the population in Iceland and over 75% of its livestock. Again, it also had an impact worldwide, but all stories to keep when we're in Iceland itself. But more importantly, what's special about Laki is it is an area that we talk about on the regular itinerary because its lava fields flow all the way down to the ring road and beyond. But more importantly, we never actually get to see it when we're driving on the ring road because you need to work for it. And that's what I love about Laki. It's actually inland. So we don't even actually see it from the ring road itself. The ring road being, of course, that main highway that circumvents the entire island. Laki is this just beautiful area. And to put things in perspective, you'll see this red arrow on your screen now. What I love about Laki is it is a humble region that doesn't look like very much apart from this otherworldly ephemeral aspect, if you will. But more importantly, it has over 15 miles of vents and craters that were formed from this unreal eruption, again, that happened in 1783. And it is a landscape that we get to see in all of its beauty, all of its prime. And it is very much, again, just us. In fact, a lot of tourists don't even know that Laki exists. And for those who do, you need a 4x4 vehicle to be able to get there. You can't just drive up in your regular sedan. You can't drive up in a regular SUV. You need to have that 4x4 function, which of course is what we have with our shuttles and with our bus when we're out in Iceland, and allows us to be able to get into these areas. And when we went out and scouted this area, it was just so nice to be there, to be able to walk through this amazing volcanic rock that has only been around now for about 250 years, give or take. So a relatively new place, geologically speaking, of course, on this planet. And it's an area that we are so excited to be able to take you to in 2026 and beyond. Because again, yeah, you need to work for it. And what I mean by that is driving out there, getting onto those highland roads. But once you're there, being able to walk through that is a full dream come true for anybody who's looking for something very different in terms of landscapes. So again, really excited to be able to bring that to you in 2026 and beyond. That of course takes us a full day to be able to get out into the highlands, so we make the most of it. And another beautiful area that we go to is Landmannalaugar. Now this is one that you may have heard of when you were researching Iceland, because of course it is the beautiful, colorful mountains of the central highlands. You know, colors that come from so many different minerals and rock types, whether it's rhyolite, whether there's sulfur in there, whether there's anything else. And when you get there, it feels like this unbelievable canvas that has just been, pardon me, that has just been painted over with all of these just beautiful, beautiful pastel colors. And we really spent a whole afternoon there. Landmannalaugar is well known, of course. It attracts a lot of people. But what's great about it is we go at times where there are hopefully next to no groups. You know, every time we've been there at the times that we go, you know, it feels maybe a little busy when we get to the parking lot, but the area we go to is actually a base camp that people use to do multi-day hikes. So although we show up and the parking lot's full, once we get out there, as you can see in these images, there really aren't that many people. And again, you just feel like you have this intimate, personalized experience that is just for us. You know, and as we make our way through the trails, you can see just the very wide array of different geological features that we have there. Everything from, again, the different types of minerals, but the different rock formations in terms of that igneous rock that is formed from lava flows and beyond. So of course, having two guides as well, you know, having an expedition leader and having a local Icelandic guide means that when we're out there, when we're in the highlands and everything, we are then able to split up the group in terms of physical mobilities, because of course, there is a very wide array of different types of trails that we're using. Most of them are quite flat for the most part, but sometimes you're looking at some switchbacks. Sometimes you're looking at walking on very uneven terrain over rocks that can be very jagged. So of course we have hiking poles for anybody who needs them, unless of course people bring their own that are suited to their specific needs. But having those two guides allows us sometimes, not always, because some trails are very unique. Some trails we don't have the option to be able to split off. But when we can, we do, and we very much try to accommodate everyone as much as possible. But having those two guides is so incredibly important, not only, of course, to be able to accommodate those physical mobilities, because on average, we're doing about 3 miles a day, give or take. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. We also break it up, and we're not usually doing 3 miles right off the bat. However, there are some longer hikes. Again, we can split that group up if necessary, but it is very much an eclectic array of different types of trails. But that's what you get with Iceland. Again, you have to work for it, right? But that's what's so magnificent about this itinerary, is being able to say, you know what, this was an interesting trail, walking through all that volcanic rock, but being able to immerse yourself is so unbelievable. And I mentioned, you know, working for it. I mentioned having to have that 4x4 kind of rugged motorized vehicle, and that's exactly what we use when we're out there. We use these customized shuttles with the tires that we need to be able to make it onto these back roads. And as you can see, the inside is quite intimate, but that's also why we have our small groups, right? To ensure that as much as possible, everybody has a window seat, and that is usually very much the case. Very comfortable bus, of course, where we're able to kind of spread out a little bit, have our backpacks, have our boots, have comfortable footwear, have some snacks, because snacks are important on any adventure, as we all know, of course. So these shuttles are incredible. Again, very nimble. They're not like the big travel buses that you see in a lot of other places with a lot of other companies. These shuttles are made to be small so that we can get into very nimble areas, that we can get into these very precise locations without not only making sure that we are leaving a very small environmental footprint, but of course, making sure that we stay as small of a group as possible. And to give you an example, the roads in the back country in the highlands, this is typically what we're going through. Of course, this is a time lapse. We're not going through at these speeds. That would be quite a whirlwind and very dizzying, I'm sure. But this is an example of some of those roads that we've seen. As you can see, there's no other vehicles. There's no one out there. Again, sure, maybe we'll cross a vehicle after an hour or two, and there are some longer stretches of time when we are in that vehicle. But more importantly, you'll notice that there's no one there, right? And of course, these vehicles are not only built to be able to get onto these highland roads, they are built to make their way through rivers. Now, we're not talking about torrential rivers, of course. We don't want to incur any sort of unexpected event. We're talking about shallow rivers, streams like this, but it is a lot of fun to be able to just drive through this beautiful scenery and to be able to make our way through these rivers. Especially, again, as I mentioned, you need that 4x4 wheel drive, and that's why we're so happy to have the shuttles that we have, because there are times where we will cross paths with, these smaller vehicles, smaller cars, with tourists who just simply don't know how to get around Iceland. And I love our local guides because they'll stop by and they'll talk to the tourists that they see and just tell them, what, don't even try. Your car is going to get stuck. It's all part of that beautiful Icelandic hospitality, making sure that we're looking out for each other. But more importantly for us, it means that we really can get to wherever we need to go. And of course, we spend all of this time, we spend so many days in the Highlands. And then as we slowly make our way back to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, we do stop at a couple of beautiful hidden wonders. The first one is Gwaun, which is on the top left, of course. It is this oasis in the middle of nowhere. And it was featured in Game of Thrones, and yet so many people don't know that it exists in Iceland. In fact, a lot of tourists just drive right by it because they actually don't see it from the road. It's this beautiful sunken valley with all of these water systems and waterfalls that are around. And again, every time that we've been there, maybe we'll see a couple people, but you're not talking about big crowds or anything like that. And this happens to be in the same area as Stung and the Commonwealth Farm, which is a markup of a longhouse that was buried under volcanic ash several hundred years ago. So before we make our way back to the capital, we actually take some time to learn about Icelandic history and really kind of take a peek into that. It's a beautiful place. We have a wonderful picnic lunch there. There are always some interpreters on hand who are able to talk to us about how life would have been in Iceland before, all the modern amenities that we have in the 19th and 20th century. So really a beautiful way to kind of close that loop in terms of, just beautiful geological features, beautiful volcanic features, the very unique species that we have with Iceland in terms of wildlife, in terms of flora, but also the history and the culture that is Iceland. Because I have to say, having worked now in Iceland for many, many years, I love that country so much. I love the people there. I mean, our local guides, we're all such good friends with them. Whether it's Harpa, whether it's Ragna, whether it's Leif, whether it's Boga, or anybody else, they're so amazing. And it's such an advantage to have them with us for this part of the journey, to be able to kind of mix, the natural interpretation side of things, but also having that local flair that comes with us. And once we make our way back to Reykjavik, well, that's where we meet our guide who will be with us, our expedition leader, who will then follow our group with us to Greenland. Now, depending on the itinerary that you're with, you may actually say goodbye to your Icelandic expedition leader and then just say hello to two brand new Greenlandic expedition leaders. Or you might have your Icelandic expedition leader who follows with you. It really just depends on the scheduling. But more importantly, you're now joined with another NatHab expedition leader. And we make our way to Greenland. But before we do that, we still have an afternoon where we get to explore some of Iceland's newest features. Now, on the left-hand side, that is volcanic flow from the last eruptions that have been happening in the Grindavik area in the Reykjanes Peninsula of Iceland, which are the newest volcanic eruptions that you've probably seen on the news. We also go check out a wonderful geothermal area. And as you can see, this group, rain or shine, they're just happy to be out there. And it's something, again, I love about Iceland is having to work for it. But I like to tell people that the rain itself is not the enemy. It is actually quite a friend, because it creates these I'm going to stop saying unbelievable. I'm going to say these magical landscapes that are very dramatic. Having the rain out there just makes everything pop and gives you such a wonderful feel for what Iceland is really all about. And then, of course, we make our way to Greenland. So we head northwest to Kulusuk, and it is one of the most beautiful landings I have ever seen in my life. You're flying over icebergs, making your way onto this runway into this tiny, tiny little airport in what feels like the absolute middle of nowhere, because that's what Greenland is this just vast, beautiful country, that is just so full of isolation, but also so rich in terms of the views that are there, in terms of the flora and the fauna that are able to call Greenland their home, as well as the culture that is out there. So whether, you are a fan of the summer flowers, like this river beauty, which is also called dwarf fireweed, whether you're coming to be able to see some whales like the minke whale that you have just kind of, steering through all these massive icebergs, or the Greenlandic sled dogs, or just the epic views of the glaciers themselves. Greenland has this unbelievable way. I really like the word unbelievable. I'm realizing that Greenland and Iceland does that to me, because every single time I go, it really just has that feel in my mind, right? So we get to Greenland, and of course, we make our way to Base Camp Greenland, which is our home while we're there. We spend 4 lovely nights just very much basking in the valley that is our backyard, whether it's spending time for happy hour at the yurts, like in this little video, whether it's hanging out inside the yurt, which is available, night or day. Of course, depending on the time of year that you come, whether it's early in the season or later, sometimes day spans quite an extensive amount of time. Regardless, though, it is such a wonderfully luxurious and yet so rugged area. It has all the amenities you need. It keeps you warm at night. It's comfortable, but it's also the perfect setting to experience Greenland for what it is. So from base camp, we leave every single day. And again, it's what I love about this itinerary, whether it's being in the highlands or being in the backcountry in Greenland, is you feel very much connected to nature in a way that most people don't in other parts of the planet. You're not surrounded by all of these trees and forests and jungles, and yet life is sprawling all around you. Whether you're looking at the Greenlandic ice sheet on a beautiful sunny day, whether you're just walking through some of these beautiful river systems with mountains all around, or whether or not you're looking at the tiny little organisms that are on the floor and on the ground. Greenland has so much to offer, and it's just a way to continue that beautiful itinerary from Iceland and to really immerse ourselves even more in a rugged and just completely isolated area. And as I mentioned in terms of landscape, and as I mentioned in terms of mobility, of course, we go through different areas, like walking on this glacier, for example. That gives you a good idea of what that glacier looks like on our final day in Greenland. But we're always there to help each other out. We always have hiking poles, as I mentioned. For glaciers, of course, we have those wonderful crampons for anybody who hasn't used them before. They might feel a little weird at first, not necessarily like moon boots, but definitely a little bit to get acclimated to. But once you're walking on them, you just feel invincible, and you feel like you can take on the world, or the glacier in this case, right? And as you can see, all smiles across the board. So really a wonderful place. But that really kind of encapsulates the turf part of things, right? Being on the ground, walking in these vast isolated areas, whether it's on moss, whether it's on rocks, whether it's on a trail that leads to nowhere. And that's kind of the point of it, right? Is to be immersed in nowhere. But of course, we also have the surf part of things with sea kayaking. So when we're out in Greenland, we have what we try for anyways, 2 days of sea kayaking. Now, as you can see, we have doubles, we have a couple of singles, but usually we like to pair people up. And of course, we try to go out on these sunny days, whether it's just in the lagoon in front of base camp, or around some of the bigger icebergs in the Surmullik Fjord, which is a very appropriate name because Surmullik, loosely translated to English, means the place of big ice, right? So if you're someone who's looking for icebergs, Surmullik Fjord is the place you want to be. And that's actually very much where our home is at base camp. Now, if kayaking isn't your thing, if paddling is not your forte, that's a-okay, because of course, us, we always have some backup plans. And if you're not in the mood to paddle, you can just join us in the safety boat, which happens to also be the Zodiac that we take to go everywhere, whether we're traveling from base camp to our hiking location, whether we're going from base camp to Tinnet, which is a small village not too far away. What you notice is that we have, the means to get there, but also we use Zodiacs to just kind of go look at ice, because ice is a lot of fun. It's big. It's something that is colossal. It moves very, very slowly. This is a time lapse over the span of 2 hours, essentially. So as you can see, these colossal, massive pieces of ice that have come right off the Greenlandic ice sheet. That massive ice sheet that is so imposing and such a core part of what Greenland is. It's so just amazing to be in the presence of all these massive icebergs that have such a history to tell, whether it is about climate change, or whether it is about, what the climate looked like hundreds of thousands of years ago. the Greenlandic ice sheet just has a way of putting us in our place, and to be able to see remnants of it in the fjord is just such a fun thing to do. So of course, we make our way to all these locations, but sometimes we'll just stop and look at these beautiful icebergs. And of course, we cross our fingers because everybody wants to see calving, everybody wants to see rolling. But regardless of that, what I love about Sørmark Fjord is hearing the ice. And what I mean by that is, even when we're at base camp for that matter, sometimes we will hear cracks in the ice and it sounds like thunder and just this massive ferocious roar, when really what it is just ice breaking apart and shifting in such a dynamic ecosystem. So really a wonderful place to be. Now I've talked about the surf, which is kayaking and being the zodiacs. I've talked about the turf, but there is another means of transportation that we use, and of course that is by air. So once we take our planes to Greenland, we very much hope, of course, if the weather is conducive to doing so, taking helicopters to get to certain locations. For example, as soon as we touch base in Greenland, if the conditions are fair, we take that red helicopter or one very similar to it to the small town of Tasiilaq. And then, of course, from base camp, again, if the weather is conducive to it, we take a smaller helicopter that lands right behind base camp, right in our backyard, to be able to have epic views of the mountains and valleys that we've called home for the last few days as we make our way back to Kulusuk. Now, speaking of these towns, it's very important to kind of take a couple of moments to just discuss them because, we've talked about the ice, we've talked about these mountains and just the epic views, but the culture in Greenland is one that is so unique on this planet. Greenlanders have been around for, thousands of years. And even if you look at human migration over the course of human history, Greenland has been a place where so many different societies and cultures have tried to make their home. And yet some have failed, some have succeeded. But regardless of that, the culture that is there presently is so beautiful in so many ways. People are so unbelievably kind. For example, Martina, who is our field operations coordinator and also helps run things at Hotel Massalik in Tasiilaq, which is your accommodations for 2 nights, pardon me, is, she's so lovely and just wants to help and wants to support our program so much. And that goes for everybody in town that we work there with. And to be able to spend a day in Tasiilaq and to be able to really see what living in Greenland is all about, because you have to understand, Greenland has gone through a transition in the last 100 years that most societies would go through over the span of hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, really jumping from a very traditional lifestyle to a much more modern lifestyle and trying to keep some of those traditions alive. Because a lot of Greenlanders still very much live off of the land, whether that's harvesting, fishing, hunting. It is very much part of that culture, and it is a culture that we very much dive into, not only in Tasiilaq, but also in a tiny little small town. And I realized that I actually wrote the wrong name. This shouldn't be Kulusuk, this should be Tinititlaq or Tinit. So apologies for that. It is the town that we can see from base camp. Now, when I say see from base camp, I don't mean that we're just anchored right outside of the town. That is not it at all. They are a very small dot and a very, very long distance. It takes about 20 minutes by Zodiac to get there. And it is the hunting and fishing town in the Sørmark Fjord. It is the only town that you will see there. And perhaps town is too much of a big word, because on a good day, Tinit can have anywhere between 50 to 70 people. Of course, with a lot of those people being out on the land, harvesting, fishing, for example, like the fish, the Arctic char that we see hanging on the bottom left picture, right? And all these colorful houses that are there. And we actually do spend an afternoon or a morning, depending on weather, of course, in Tinit, exploring the town, learning more about how people survive, but not only that, thrive in this very wild landscape that is unrelenting, that demands respect and resilience and adaptability. So as we can see, although it is very wild, we do take some time to look at the human aspect of things, because again, Greenlanders are just so well adapted and so well suited to this beautiful environment. And it's worth taking time to talk with them, because when you dive into that culture, you learn that it is very, very rich. So even though you're in an area that seems like it should be devoid of life, you see this cornucopia of life all around you. Again, referring to those Greenlandic sled dogs, which are a unique breed. You don't find them anywhere else in the world. Or if it's meeting people like Tinka, who are here doing a traditional drum dance, or learning about the art, learning about the beadwork, you learn that all these traditions that have been around for thousands of years are still very much present in this beautiful area. And it's very much what I love about this itinerary. Again, I think I've had a smile on my face for most of this presentation because I dare I say it probably is my favorite itinerary that I get to run. And that is no slight to any other itinerary. I just came off my polar bear season, and it was unreal because Churchill is a place that I absolutely love. As Brooke mentioned, you know, I do spend some time on that coastal tundra. With that said, though, there's something about being in Iceland, Greenland, and being able to experience both of those spheres in one trip that I think is one of the luckiest things that someone can do on this planet. You get to see the vast, endless green landscapes of Iceland, the unique wildlife like the puffins, perhaps an Arctic fox if we're lucky, fulmars, which are, oh my gosh, even fulmars I could spend so much time talking about, which I will do on trip with whoever I get to see next summer. Whether it's the geological features, of course, like the basaltic columns, or even diving into that history. And then, you know, we spend those 4 or 5 nights in Iceland, and it feels like an eternity in the best kind of way because you don't want that magic to stop. And then on top of that, you get to go to Greenland afterwards. You get to go to this remarkably isolated area that, again, is so full of life. And you really do it at the beat of our own drum. And what I mean by that is when we're in Greenland, sure, we have, you know, certain things we want to hit. And at the beginning and at the end, we have that schedule that allows us to spend time to see, like, to go see the Valley of the Flowers, to go walk on the glacier. But in between that, it's very much up to the weather, to the group, to the expedition leaders, to our local guides, to decide where we're going to go, what we're going to see. And regardless of what that is, it is always spectacular. We really, really live at the beat of the landscape, at the pulse that is Greenland. So with that, I truly do hope that we see a few of you at the very least, whether it's in 2026 or 2027. I know I have 2 guests who are on my polar bear trip, Michelle and Mike. I hope you are watching right now, and I know that I will see you in 2026. Really, really looking forward to it. But again, this is such a special itinerary. You know, the way it was built, the way it was structured, I think really gets the best of both worlds. Of course, even though you're in a smaller part of Iceland and you're not doing the whole island itself, you're getting to see parts of Iceland that most people have never heard of, most people never go to, and even some Icelanders haven't been able to get to themselves. So it really is quite unique and quite special. So with that, Brooke, that concludes that part of the webinar, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments or anything like that.
Oh, Anthony, thank you. I am so excited for anybody joining this itinerary next year. Oh, wow. I just loved all the isolation. It just felt so wild, just you going through those photos and those images. Oh, this is a dream come true for anybody who's joining, for sure. So just like Anthony said, everybody, we do have some time for questions. If you have trip-specific questions, go ahead and put them in the chat function, and I will read them along for you. And I do have a couple questions here asking about connecting different trips, and that would be amazing if you did. Our adventure specialists would be more than happy to help see if this trip could combine with a different trip. They are experts at that. So I will steer everybody to our adventure specialist at the end of the webinar, but yes, please keep that in mind because you can connect. So let's see what else we have in here. Okay. So when we are driving around in the vans, does everybody have a window seat?
Yeah, that is a great question. Yes, that is very much the goal of our shuttles, is to allow everyone to have that window seat. We fully recognize that it is a smaller space, and because of that, we want everyone to be able to have, you know, views on those landscapes. So yes, everyone is supposed to have a window seat to be able to just really enjoy it, because as I mentioned, we do spend quite a bit of time in those shuttles. It is Iceland. You need to drive to get to places. Sometimes we'll be in the shuttles for an hour, 2 hours. Of course, if we go beyond that, we make pit stops to make sure that we have those bio breaks, of course, that we make sure that people can stretch out their legs. You know, we want people to experience the landscape, not be stuck in the shuttle. But yes, the idea is for everyone to have a window seat, to be able to view outside, because sometimes just driving and enjoying the landscape as we're going by is such a just beautiful thing to do, right?
Great, thank you. Next, does Greenland have any geothermal features like Iceland does?
Ah, geothermal features. Well, to my knowledge, it does not. Greenland and Iceland, although they are very close geologically speaking, are very different places. Of course, without going too much into geological history, Iceland has only been around for roughly, 60 million years or so, give or take, versus Greenland that's been around for far, far, far longer. But if we look at the giant hotspot that is underneath Iceland, it was at one point underneath Greenland, and there are still some remnants of that heat going around, but you're not going to find the kind of mud pools and the geothermal vents in Iceland in Greenland. It is very much a different landscape. And it is one of the reasons why I love this itinerary so much, is you go from Iceland, which of course, as we know, the name is somewhat kind of misleading. We go from Iceland that has this beautiful kind of eclectic landscape in terms of the mosses there, the geothermal areas like the bubbling mud pools, as well as all of those volcanic features like the brand new igneous rock. And then we shift over to much, much older landscape with that Greenlandic ice sheet that dominates 80% of the entire country. So no, there aren't necessarily geothermal areas in the same way that we have them in Iceland, but there are so many geological features that we get in Greenland that we don't get to see in Iceland. So we really do get the best of both worlds. So if geology is your thing, this itinerary was made for you.
Absolutely. Next here, could you elaborate a little bit more about the bug situation?
Ah, yes, the bug situation. This kind of goes back and relates to what I was saying in terms of working for it. Generally speaking, they aren't as bad as some people may think. However, there are certain seasons where sometimes the bugs can be a little bit more motivated. And what I mean by that is depending on the amount of rains, depending on if it's been a wet or a dry season, especially in the Greenland portion of things, sometimes the bugs can be quite irritating, which is why we have those beautiful bug nets available for everybody. Once you put them on, it feels like the bugs aren't even around. Although, of course, everyone has different tolerances. So generally speaking, bugs, not too much of an issue, but yes, they are around, they do exist. So you will get black flies and you'll get some mosquitoes in Greenland. And normally, I would have said in Iceland, you don't get mosquitoes. However, that is starting to change, signs of the climate changing a little bit. But please don't think that there are clouds of mosquitoes in Iceland. That is not the case. They are very few and far between. You may perhaps get some bugs from time to time, but again, we have bug nets just in case. When I did the Iceland Greenland itinerary last year, we had no bugs in Iceland. It was a little bit cooler. It was a little bit wetter. And then in Greenland, yes, we had some mosquitoes. Yes, we had some black flies. So it very much varies from trip to trip.
Great, thank you. Now, I know this isn't a no before you go, but we are getting a couple of questions asking a little bit more about what to expect when it comes to packing gear. Do you have a couple tips in mind for that?
Yeah, gear. Of course, we are limited in how much we can take the Greenland because we take helicopters, because we take smaller boats, because. That being said, when it comes to gear, you want to make sure that you're ready for potentially cold and wet conditions, whether that's in Iceland or Greenland. It is one of the things that I love about these countries is the weather is incredibly dynamic. It can be sunny and hot in the morning, and then in the afternoon, it can be raining with very, very high winds. So layering is your best friend. You don't necessarily need to bring your entire wardrobe by any means, but having a great base layer, having a mid layer, having a top layer, and waterproof layers is your best bet. So bring waterproof pants, bring a waterproof jacket, whether that's a raincoat or something thicker or anything along those lines. I highly recommend waterproof footwear, whether that is shoes or boots. Usually boots with good ankle support, though, is something you want to strive for. Again, there is uneven terrain here. And if we're caught out, and there's a random flash storm of any kind, you want to make sure that you have everything you need to stay nice and warm and cozy, but also have the support you need in your feet. So yes, waterproof boots are probably the best thing that you can have on top of waterproof layers.
Fantastic, thank you. During the Iceland portion of this trip, is there any opportunities to get into a remote thermal swim hole?
Remote thermal swim hole. Potentially. The thing about this particular itinerary is because it is condensed, and again, we want it that way. There's a reason why it is structured this way. Is it means that we don't necessarily have as many opportunities as you would on the full length trip. It very much depends on timing. Those warm thermal pools are not the main objective of this itinerary. It really is to be in the highlands. And generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, most of the areas that we go to are not as geothermically active as some of the other places that have those warm pools. However, if for whatever reason, the weather changes our plans, if for whatever reason something comes up and there's an opportunity, we will try to make that opportunity happen.
Fantastic. Thanks for that response. We're getting lots of questions about wildlife. Outside of puffins and maybe a couple whales, what are some species that people can hopefully expect to see on the itineraries?
Yeah, so Iceland and Greenland, marine mammals are something that is always on everybody's mind. For Iceland specifically, we spend most of our time in the highlands, so I'm going to focus on what you'll see on the ground, potentially in the air. Arctic fox are usually the biggest question that we get. Arctic fox are few and far between in Iceland. They're hard to spot, especially in the highlands where everything is so remote. Not to say they aren't there. Of course, we're always keeping our eyes on the land just in case, but that is a potential in terms of mammals that we could see. In terms of birds, oh gosh, especially in the middle of summer, of course, puffins are there and northern fulmars are there, eider ducks are there. You'll get potentially some whooper swans. They should be around that time with their young goslings who are starting to grow. Beyond that, you'll get black guillemots. You'll get, of course, so many different types of gulls, whether it's an Icelandic gull, hopefully a Ross's gull. I've seen a few of those recently. So lots of different bird species, of course. And then once we make our way to Greenland, those bird species, for the most part, are still around. Not all of them. Of course, we won't get puffins in Greenland, but you'll get a lot of those gulls. They'll be around, those black guillemots once again. Arctic fox, there is a potential to see them in Greenland. So far on most of my trips, I've been able to see at least one Arctic fox. Again, that is not a guarantee by any means, but if people have keen eyes and keep their eyes out, there's always a potential for them. And then whales in Greenland is the one that always I'm attracted to. We're talking about humpback whales, we're talking about minke whales, we're talking about fin whales, and if we're lucky, perhaps some pinnipeds, so maybe some seals as well. So it really depends on what is going on that particular day, where we are, and all that good stuff. So those are some of the wildlife species that we could see. And then beyond that, those are just animals. But in terms of flora, and this is what probably was the most surprising thing to me when I first started guiding in Greenland, is just the sheer amount of flora that is out there. Although, yes, it is a subarctic leading into the Arctic, there are so many different species. We go to a place called the Valley of the Flowers for a reason, because when you're there, you're looking at hawkweed, you're looking at river beauty, you're looking at common bloodwort, you're looking at harebells, that list goes on and on and on. Then you're looking at all the dwarf versions of different shrubs, like you're looking at silver willow, you're looking at so many different types of mosses and lichens, and of course berries as well. If you're there when the berries are out, of course we spend some time to forage. I love a good foraging activity where we can ground up some crowberries, maybe get some blueberries as well, or bilberries rather, which is the appropriate species name. So in terms of flora and fauna, that's typically what we're looking at.
Oh, sounds amazing. Oh, I wish I was going.
One day, Brooke,
Maybe
one day.
one day. One day, everybody. Hope you go. Okay, next. This is a good question. How likely is it to see the northern lights on this itinerary?
Yes, the northern lights. Well, having said that, it is a very dynamic ecosystem. The northern lights themselves, of course, we know will shine whether it is cloudy or not. However, if it is very cloudy, there is no chance to see them. There's also something else. The fact that when we're in Greenland in the middle of summer, in the middle of July, it just simply does not get dark enough to see the northern lights. So our best chance is in Iceland if it is at the right time of year and if the clouds aren't out. So the answer to that question is I don't know, very honestly, because it very much depends on the timing of the year that you were there, and again, the weather.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
You briefly mentioned bathrooms, but could you maybe elaborate a little bit further? How do bathrooms work on this trip?
Yeah. So another thing I love about this trip is, you're on an adventure when you need to talk about bathrooms for more than 30 seconds. That is a quote from one of my dear friends, Heather, who is also a guide for NatHab, and I thought it was such a wonderful thing to say because it is true. We make washrooms available as often as possible for the Iceland portion of things. Although our shuttle is very great at making our way through the highlands, it does not have a washroom in it. It is just not built that way, which is why we integrate washroom times into our itinerary, again, for the Iceland portion. And those washrooms will range very much from very simple, very well maintained outhouses to, of course, actual plumbing, as well as, indoor facilities. However, if we're in the middle of a hike in the middle of nowhere, normally I would say it's the facilitaries, no pun intended. However, we know that Iceland doesn't have many trees, so oftentimes it's going behind a rock, or just waiting until we're back. Wherever we go, though, whatever hike we do, there is always a washroom available to make sure that, again, bladder management is very well taken care of. In Greenland, Greenland is extensively remote. So at base camp itself, there is actually an area where there is a washroom, which is basically an outhouse, but then every single safari style tent, of course, has its own private washroom, which is, again, a very rugged washroom. Don't expect any indoor plumbing here. It is a very well adapted toilet. I won't go into any further details about that because we're going to try to keep things PG, but more importantly is you have facilities around you at base camp. Once we're out on the remote landscape, however, it is always basically we designate areas because we are in polar bear territory. So that is something that we need to talk about in terms of safety. But we designate areas and people just take turns kind of going behind rocks or doing everything like that. We also have these little toilet kits that we take with us, and the guides will pack that all in and out because, of course, we are leave no trace. We don't want to leave any sort of human indication on the landscape whatsoever. So the point of what I'm trying to say here is, regardless of where we are, regardless of what we're doing, there is always an opportunity for a washroom stop. It just very much will vary between full indoor plumbing with potentially heated floors to very much using the rocks and landscape around us.
That's how you know you're in a wild place. When you need a bush bathroom,
That's it.
that's when you know. Yes. So since you are a pro photographer, what is your camera kit? What will you be bringing with you to take some beautiful photos when you're on the itinerary of the trip?
So for this itinerary, usually I have a mix. I have oh gosh, usually I have my 200 to 600, which is my long range lens. I also have my wide angle 24 to 70. And then I also do like having my mid, which is a 70 to 200. So again, given the fact that we have constraints in terms of weight and size for the planes, you want to choose your camera gear probably more strategically. When we're in Greenland, generally speaking, I'm only using my wide angle lens simply because the landscapes are so vast and so just kind of daunting. It's very difficult to kind of think about taking, 200 to 600 to take a picture of a mountain. However, if you're wanting to play around and wanting to lug that gear around, you can get some pretty interesting things, keeping in mind that we are in Zodiacs when we're traveling. So of course we offer dry bags. So make sure that if you don't have your dry bag, use one of ours because that does limit how you can kind of transport your gear around. For Iceland, on the other hand, I usually jump between all my three lenses depending on what we're seeing. For example, in this picture that we have right here with the puffin, I was using my 70 to 200 because we were only about perhaps 20, 30 feet away from the puffins. So for wildlife, of course, when you're close up, it's nice to do that. Otherwise, I use my 2 to 600 in case we see something far in the distance. That also goes for Greenland a little bit. I talked about whales. Of course, if there are whales, we stop and we do some observations. It's nice to be able to have either a long lens because we don't go right up to the whales. Of course, these are all passive, very respectful observations. So it is kind of nice to have that longer lens. So what do I have? I have my three lenses. I have some battery packs. Keeping in mind that we're in very remote areas, having extra batteries is probably something you want to think about. If you're able to have anything like a lens hood that is waterproof or a bag or anything like that, also recommend bringing that because again, the weather can turn very quickly. So I do realize everybody's different. What I would say though is you probably want to aim at keeping the amount of camera gear you have relatively low, but having enough gear that you can potentially get some very nice wide angle shots and also some long range shots.
And just out of curiosity, what is the camera body that you are currently using?
Yeah, I jump between two. I have my Sony A7R III and I have my Sony Alpha 6400. So I have a crop sensor. I also have a full frame. I'm very much a Sony guy. I started with Sony. That again is no slight to Canon or Nikon. Everyone has their brand that they love, and that is totally the way it should be. But that is what I work with.
Great, thank you. And this will be the last question. Somehow we're almost to the top of the hour here. This always fly by so fast. But last question here. Could you elaborate on exactly what the physical requirements are for this trip if somebody's considering joining?
Yeah, absolutely. Physical requirements are probably some of the higher ones for NatHab adventures, simply because, well, we're in very remote areas, right? So being able to walk on uneven, rugged terrain for about 3 miles or so, sometimes even a little bit more, again, is something that you want to have on your radar. We walk rain or shine. So of course, if there's a torrential downpour, we're not going to be out there. The idea is not to suffer, it's to have fun. But again, we are in very remote areas. So a light rain is something that will not bother us. Again, most of the trails that we do can be flat in Iceland. However, there are certain places like when we go to Elgja, where there is very rocky terrain. Now, we're not going up any huge steep mountains by any means whatsoever. This isn't a climbing trip. We're not going up Mount Everest or anything like that. Sometimes we'll do perhaps 100, 200 feet of elevation. But that's generally what we're looking at. And then when we're in Greenland, of course, it's all uneven terrain. It is very rare that we have a flat path of any kind apart from that base camp. Perhaps we'll have some flatter areas, but there's a couple places with some steeper inclines. Again, they are short, but they can be a bit steeper. You're walking on uneven terrain, perhaps on vegetation that feels like you're walking on a wet trampoline. Again, we try to avoid as much of the wet areas as possible, but sometimes it's just not possible. There are a couple of little stream crossings, whether you're in Iceland or Greenland. Again, we're not going through any rivers here. We're not going through anything where you're going to have to take your boots off or anything like that. Usually it's a helping hand or anything along those lines, or perhaps a hop or something like that, or using walking poles. But I'd say that of all the trips that we run, this is probably one that, yes, the physical requirements are up there for a reason, especially being able to get in and out of zodiacs, being able to sea kayak if that's something you want to do. Of course, all these activities are optional, but you want to be comfortable on uneven terrain. You want to be comfortable in a rugged environment. You want to be comfortable walking perhaps 3 miles or so, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, and that's 3 miles per day. Sometimes it's in one hike, sometimes it's multiple hikes together. So that kind of encapsulates what the physical requirements are all about.
Yes, thanks for that. And everybody, if you have further questions on that, by all means, please ask your adventure specialist. They'll be happy to review your abilities and the trip itself too. And you can compare which itinerary might be best for you and your abilities. So we want to get you out there. So we need to get you on the right trip, But Anthony, with that, I will wrap up the Q&A portion and turn it to you for any last closing comments.
Thank you so much, Brooke, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. Again, this is such a special itinerary. Being able to combine two countries like this is not something we get to do very often. And the way that this has been curated is such that you're able to really feel the essence of these two beautiful countries that again are so remote, so just out there, and being able to live that is something that in my opinion is very, very special. And even from a guide's point of view, this is one of our favorite trips to lead because you really get to go where most people don't. You get to be in these never-ending landscapes, and you really get to do it with people who want adventure, who are looking for something different. So with that, I sincerely hope that we see a few of you in 2026 and in 2027 and beyond that, because again, this itinerary is very, very special. So again, thank you everybody, and safe travels. Have fun with the year that is coming to an end. Happy New Year to everybody, and see you all in 2026.
Yeah, same to you, Anthony. Thank you for putting together this wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. If you're interested in more information about this trip or any of our other trips, please give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are more than happy to help you. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and the replay will be available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.